The observance of 4 signs. The Bodhisattva visits the royal garden. Thus, Prince Siddhattha, the Bodhisattva, ascended the throne to rule the kingdom of Kapilavatthu at the age of 16. At 29, after living in the opulence and comfort befitting a Kakavati, wheel-turning monarch, attended by 40,000 courtesans led by Queen Yasodhara, the prince suddenly felt a longing to visit the royal garden. He summoned his charioteer and commanded, "Charioteer, prepare the chariot. I wish to visit the royal garden." "Yes, my lord," replied the charioteer. He then prepared a splendid chariot worthy of noble beings, adorned with exquisite decorations and drawn by 4 pure white steeds as radiant as the full moon or lotus blossoms, swift as the wind, or as mighty as Garuda, the king of birds. When the charioteer informed the prince that the chariot was ready, the prince mounted the resplendent chariot, akin to the heavenly palaces, and set off toward the royal garden amidst a grand and bustling procession, the omen of an elderly man. While en route to the royal garden, the celestial beings conferred among themselves. The time for Prince Siddhattha to attain Buddhahood is drawing near. Let us show him the signs that will prompt him to renounce the world and become a Sama, ascetic. They requested a deva to take the form of an elderly man, his hair white, his teeth missing, his back hunched, and his hands trembling as he walked with the aid of a staff. This vision was created by the deities to be visible only to the prince and his charioteer. Upon seeing the old man, the prince asked his charioteer, "Charioteer, the hair of that man is unlike that of others. It is entirely white. His body is strange as well, toothless, thin, and trembling with a hunched back. Who is that man?" The charioteer replied, "My lord, he is called an old man." Never having heard the term old man before, let alone seen such a figure, the prince questioned further, "I have never seen anyone like this before, white-haired, toothless, gaunt, and trembling with a hunched back. Why does someone become old like this?" The charioteer answered, "My lord, anyone who can no longer live long is called an old man, one whose time is nearly at an end." The prince then asked, "Charioteer, does this mean I too will age? Will I too be unable to escape old age?" When the charioteer replied, "Yes, my lord, all of us, including you and even I, are subject to aging. None can escape it," the prince declared. "If no one can escape old age, I too am bound to suffer it. Turn the chariot around. I no longer wish to visit the royal garden. Return to the palace immediately." "Yes, my lord," the charioteer responded and turned the chariot back toward the palace instead of continuing to the royal garden. The prince's reflection. Like a lion struck by an arrow, which does not attempt to remove it but instead charges at the hunter, so too do the Buddhas. They do not aim to eliminate the effects of suffering but, with wisdom, trace its root causes, much like the lion seeking the hunter responsible for its wound. Thus, Buddhas are likened to the kings of the forest. The charioteer explained the nature of old age according to his understanding, but the Bodhisattva prince, with his resolve for enlightenment, comprehended through insight that birth was the root cause of aging. Returning to the palace, he reflected deeply with experiential wisdom. "Oh, how detestable is birth! Whoever truly sees the nature of birth will inevitably recognize aging as well." Such reflections brought him profound sorrow and disenchantment. King Siddhattha increases security. King Siddhattha summoned the charioteer and inquired, "Charioteer, why did my son hastily return without continuing to the royal garden?" The charioteer replied, "Your Majesty, the prince saw an elderly man, and it was this sight that prompted him to return." The king pondered deeply. "My son must ascend the throne and rule this kingdom. He must not renounce the world and become a Sama." The prophecy of the Brahmins that the prince would leave the world to become an ascetic must be proven false. "You ministers, why do you keep undermining my plans? Quickly arrange for more entertainment. Increase the number of courtesans and dancers around the prince. If he indulges in sensual pleasures, He will no longer think of becoming a Sama. Thus, the king ordered increased security at every post, with guards stationed half a league apart in all 4 directions. The omen of a sick man. Despite being surrounded and indulged in the 5 sensual pleasures provided in abundance by King Siddhattha, who sought to prevent the prince from renouncing the world and becoming a Sama, Prince Siddhattha spent day and night reveling in luxury and opulence within the golden halls of the palace. His initial feelings of disillusionment with birth and aging gradually subsided. After living such a lavish life for 4 months, the Bodhisattva prince once again ventured outside the palace to visit the royal garden, riding a chariot as before. Along the way, he encountered a sick man, conjured by the celestial beings for the second time. The man writhed in pain, afflicted by illness, unable to rise or lie down without assistance. He lay on a sickbed, soiled with his own filth. Upon witnessing this sight, the prince asked his charioteer, "Charioteer, the eyes of that man are unlike the eyes of others. They are weak and pale. His voice is also unlike the voices of others. It is shrill and distressing. His body, too, is not like others. It looks gaunt and exhausted. What is such a person called?" The charioteer replied, "My lord, he is called a sick man." As the prince had never before seen or even heard the term sick man, he inquired further, "Charioteer, I have never seen anyone like this, a person who cannot sit or lie down without assistance, writhing in his own filth, constantly groaning. What does it mean to be sick? Explain to me the nature of sickness." The charioteer responded, "My lord, a sick person is someone who does not know whether they will recover or not." The prince then asked, "Charioteer, how can this be? Does this mean I too could fall ill? Am I too incapable of escaping sickness?" The charioteer replied, "Yes, my lord, all of us, including you and even I, are subject to sickness. No one can avoid this condition." Hearing this, the prince declared, "Charioteer, if no one can escape sickness, then I too must suffer it. Turn the chariot around. I no longer wish to visit the royal garden or enjoy its pleasures. Turn back immediately, right here where I saw the sick man, and take me back to the palace." "Yes, my lord," the charioteer replied, and, instead of continuing to the royal garden, turned the chariot around to return to the palace. The Bodhisattva's reflection. Although the charioteer had only explained the painful, distressing, and oppressive nature of sickness as he understood it, the Bodhisattva prince, like the king of lions, possessed the resolve to become a Buddha. Through contemplation, he realized that birth was the root cause of sickness and aging. Upon returning to the palace, deeply moved, he reflected, "Oh, how detestable is birth! To whoever sees the reality of birth, the realities of aging and sickness are equally evident." Having pondered this, the prince grew sorrowful and disheartened. King Siddhattha increases security. As before, King Siddhattha summoned the charioteer and asked, "Charioteer, why did my son hastily return instead of continuing to the royal garden?" The charioteer replied, "Your Majesty, the prince returned quickly because he saw a sick man." The king, reflecting as he had before, gave orders to strengthen the security even further by stationing guards at intervals of 3 yojanas in all 4 directions. Additionally, he assigned more courtesans and dancers to surround the prince in an effort to keep him engrossed in sensual pleasures and prevent any thoughts of renouncing the world. The omen of a dead man. Despite being surrounded and enthralled by the 5 sensual pleasures arranged by King Siddhattha to prevent him from renouncing the world and becoming a Sama, Prince Siddhattha continued to indulge in luxury and opulence within the golden halls of the palace. The deeply moving impressions of the detestable nature of birth and aging gradually faded from his mind. After another 4 months of living such a lavish life, the Bodhisattva prince once again left the palace, traveling to the royal garden in a chariot drawn by magnificent steeds. Along the way, he encountered an omen conjured by the celestial beings for the 3rd time, a funeral procession. A group of people surrounded a bier carrying a decorated coffin draped with colorful cloths. The prince asked his charioteer, "Charioteer, why are all these people gathered together?" The charioteer replied, "My lord, these people are gathered around the bier to prepare for the funeral of someone who has died, having never seen a dead person or heard the term dead." The prince commanded the charioteer, "Charioteer, take me to the place where the dead person lies, surrounded by these people preparing the bier." "Yes, my lord," replied the charioteer, steering the chariot toward the site of the deceased. Upon seeing the lifeless body, the prince asked, "Charioteer, what is the nature of a dead person?" The charioteer responded, "My lord, when someone has died, their relatives will never see them again, and the deceased will never see their relatives again." The prince questioned further, "Charioteer, how can this be? Must I also die like that person? Am I too someone who cannot escape death? Will there come a day when my father, mother, and relatives will no longer see me, and I will no longer see them?" The charioteer replied, "My lord, all of us, including you and even I, are subject to death. No one can escape it. It is certain that one day your father, mother, and relatives will no longer see you, and you will no longer see them." Note, the mention of the prince's mother here refers to his foster mother, Mahapajapati Gautami. Upon hearing this, the prince said, "Charioteer, if everyone is unable to escape death, then I too must die. Therefore, I no longer wish to go to the royal garden or enjoy its pleasures. Turn the chariot around immediately, here where I saw the dead person, and take me straight back to the palace." "Yes, my lord," replied the charioteer, and instead of continuing to the royal garden, he turned the chariot around and returned to the palace. The Bodhisattva's reflection. The prince, like the king of lions, and with the resolve of one destined for Buddhahood, contemplated deeply. He realized that birth was the root cause of the three signs he had witnessed: aging, sickness, and death. Upon returning to the palace, through profound insight, he reflected, "Oh, how detestable is birth! To anyone who perceives the reality of birth, the realities of aging, sickness, and death are equally clear." Having contemplated thus, the prince grew sorrowful and disillusioned. King Siddhattha increases security. Once again, King Siddhattha summoned the charioteer and asked as before. When the charioteer replied, "Your Majesty," the prince hurried back because he saw a dead person. The king reflected as he had previously. He issued orders to further strengthen the security around the prince, stationing guards at intervals of 1 yojana in all 4 directions. The king also assigned additional courtesans and dancers to keep the prince entertained, in the hope of preventing him from contemplating renunciation, the omen of a Samaṇa. Despite being surrounded and captivated by the 5 sensual pleasures that King Siddhattha provided in greater abundance to prevent the prince from renouncing the world and becoming a Samaṇa, Prince Siddhattha continued to live a life of indulgence and luxury within the gilded halls of the palace. The deeply moving impressions of the realities of birth, aging, sickness, and death gradually subsided. After 4 more months of such an opulent life, the Bodhisattva prince once again left the palace, traveling to the royal garden in a chariot drawn by magnificent steeds. Along the way, he encountered an omen conjured by celestial beings for the 4th time. A man living the life of a Samaṇa, with a shaved head and beard, clad in robes dyed with tree bark. "Charioteer," the prince said, "the head of this man is unlike that of others. It is shaved clean, and so is his beard. His clothing is also different. It is dyed with tree bark. What is such a person called?" The charioteer replied, "My lord, he is called a Samaṇa." The prince asked further, "Charioteer, what does Samaṇa mean? Explain to me the nature of a Samaṇa." The charioteer replied, "My lord, a Samaṇa is someone who contemplates that the highest good is to practice the 10 wholesome actions, Kusalakamapatha, beginning with generosity, dana. Such a person has renounced worldly life and wears robes dyed with tree bark. They strive to follow the Dhamma, the righteous path. free from defilements, wholly pure and virtuous. A Sama avoids harming sentient beings, seeks to bring benefit to all living creatures, and abandons worldly attachments to live a life of purity. Note: the charioteer was able to provide this explanation due to the divine intervention of celestial beings, who inspired him to describe the characteristics of a Sama accurately. For bodhisattvas with longer lifespans, the intervals between witnessing these omens are 100 years. However, in the case of our bodhisattva, who appeared during an era of shorter lifespans, the time between each omen was only 4 months. Upon hearing this, the bodhisattva said to the charioteer, "This man is truly noble and admirable for renouncing the household life and contemplating that the highest good is to practice the 10 wholesome actions in accordance with the Dhamma, in purity and righteousness. He is deserving of great respect for striving to live a life free from harming sentient beings and bringing benefit to others. Charioteer, drive the chariot to where the Sama is." "Yes, my lord," replied the charioteer, steering the chariot toward the Sama. When they arrived, the prince addressed the Sama, who was, in truth, a celestial being in disguise, and said, "Sir, what are you doing? Your head is unlike others. Shave clean, and your robes are not like the garments of others." The Sama replied, "My lord, I am known as a Sama." The prince inquired further, "What does Sama mean?" The Sama responded, "My lord, I am one who is left behind the household life, shaving my hair and beard and wearing robes dyed with tree bark. I contemplate that the highest good is to practice the 10 wholesome actions, beginning with generosity. These wholesome actions are encapsulated in 4 special terms: Idama, meaning the righteous path; Isama, meaning harmony with the Dhamma; Ikasala, meaning purity; and Ipana, meaning merit, both in cause and result. I strive to live a life free from harming sentient beings, bringing benefit to others, and dedicating myself to the righteous path." Upon hearing this, the prince expressed his admiration. "You are truly noble and worthy of great respect. You have left behind the household life, shaved your hair and beard, and donned robes dyed with tree bark. You contemplate that the highest good is to practice the 10 wholesome actions, encapsulated in the 4 principles of Dhamma, Sama, Kusala, and Panna, and strive to avoid harming sentient beings while benefiting them. You are an admirable and noble person." The day the prince renounced the world. Before renouncing the household life, the prince visited the royal garden 4 times. On the full moon day of Saha, June-July, in the year 96 of the Maha era calendar, while riding a splendid chariot drawn by noble steeds to the royal garden, he encountered the first omen, an old man. Upon witnessing this, he renounced pride in youth. The second time, on the full moon day of Kataka, October-November, while traveling to the royal garden, the prince saw the second omen, a sick man. This sight led him to renounce arrogance derived from robust health. The third time, on the full moon day of Faguna, February-March, the prince encountered the third omen, a dead man being carried in a funeral procession. This sight caused him to relinquish pride in life itself. On another occasion, on the full moon day of Saha in the year 93 of the Maha era calendar, the prince once again journeyed to the royal garden. Along the way, he saw the fourth omen, a Sama. This sight awakened in him a deep admiration for the ascetic life, and he resolved, "Today, I will become a Sama." With this determination, he continued toward the royal garden. Saka sends Visakama to assist the bodhisattva. The prince spent the day in the royal garden, enjoying its serene beauty. After bathing, as the sun began to set, he sat gracefully on a sacred stone. At that moment, he felt the desire to change his attire. Saka, recognizing the prince's wish, commanded the celestial being Visakama to appear in the guise of a barber to assist the prince in changing into heavenly robes. While musicians played 5 types of instruments, and others sang and danced, the Brahmas praised the prince with sweet blessings. "May your majesty achieve complete success. Be free from all dangers and enemies, and always shine with happiness and glory. Dressed in 5 types of celestial adornments, the prince ascended a magnificently decorated chariot and returned to the palace. The birth of Rahula. At that time, King Siddhattha received news that Queen Yasodhara had given birth to a son. The king sent messengers to deliver the joyous news to the prince. "Bring this happy tidings to my son." Upon hearing that a son had been born, the prince, deep in reflective insight, remarked, Ajura Rahu, a chain to bind me has been born. A great bond has arisen." When King Siddhattha inquired about the prince's reaction, the messengers reported the Bodhisattva's words. Hearing this, the king named his grandson Rahula, saying, "From this day forth, my grandson will be called Prince Rahula." Princess Kisa Gotami's poem of joy and serenity. As the prince entered the city of Kapilavatthu in his chariot, resplendent with regal majesty and grandeur, accompanied by a large retinue, Princess Kisa Gotami, a graceful and noble lady of the Sakya clan, observed his radiant appearance from the balcony of her palace. Overcome with joy, she recited the following verse. Nibuddha nuna Samaṇa, Nibuddha nuna Sopita, Nibuddha nuna Sanari, Yasya Itisopati. Blessed and serene must be the mother who bore such a radiant son, one as brilliant as the morning sun, a man of extraordinary beauty and unparalleled wisdom. Merely reflecting on his virtues and appearance each day would fill her heart with boundless serenity. Blessed and serene must be the father of such a remarkable son, radiant as the rising sun, of noble lineage, unmatched beauty, and supreme intelligence. Such a father must feel daily joy and peace in his heart. Blessed and serene must be the wife of such an extraordinary man, one as radiant as the morning sun, of noble lineage, unparalleled beauty, and supreme wisdom. Her days would surely be filled with blissful serenity. Upon hearing Princess Kisa Gotami's heartfelt verse, the prince reflected, "My cousin Kisa Gotami speaks of how the image of such a person can bring joy and peace to their mother, father, and spouse. But what truly brings lasting peace to the heart? With his mind free from defilements, the prince realized, true serenity can only be achieved when the flames of lust are extinguished. True peace arises when the fires of hatred and delusion are quenched. Ultimate liberation lies in the cessation of all defilements, such as pride and false views." Kisa Gotami's words were indeed delightful and pointed toward the truth of serenity. "Today, I will renounce the world, become a Sama, and seek Nirvāṇa, the ultimate reality, the true cessation of all suffering." Determined to renounce, the prince thought, "This jeweled necklace is the teacher's fee for Princess Kisa Gotami, for her words reminded me of the path to liberation." He removed the necklace, worth £1, from his neck and sent it to Kisa Gotami. Overjoyed, the princess thought, "My cousin, Prince Siddhattha, has given me this gift out of his heartfelt regard." The prince's final night in the palace. Returning to his splendid palace, a masterpiece of beauty and luxury, the prince reclined on his royal couch. Surrounding him were maidservants and dancers of celestial beauty, skilled in music and dance, holding 5 types of musical instruments. They began to sing and play to entertain the prince. But with a heart that had grown weary of worldly pleasures and filled with disgust for the activities that fueled defilements, the prince felt no delight in their performances. Gradually, he drifted into a light slumber. Seeing this, the maidservants thought, "We have been singing and playing for the prince, but he has fallen asleep. Let us take this chance to rest as well." They too lay down to sleep, their instruments scattered around them. The fragrant oil lamps continued to flicker gently, casting a soft glow across the opulent palace. The renunciation of the prince. Upon waking, the prince sat cross-legged on his luxurious bed and gazed around. He saw the court dancers asleep, some sprawled over their musical instruments, saliva dripping from their mouths and soiling their cheeks and bodies, others grinding their teeth, snoring loudly, or mumbling incoherently in their sleep. Some had their mouths wide open, while others lay naked or with disheveled hair. The scene resembled a ghastly cemetery filled with grotesque corpses. Witnessing these revolting transformations in the once elegant dancers, the prince felt an even deeper sense of detachment from sensual pleasures. This is how his renunciation unfolded. 1. Apasadakama. Sensual pleasures bring little joy but much suffering. Their faults and flaws are numerous indeed. 2. Ahikankalpamkama, the simile of the dry bone. Sensual pleasures are like a dry bone. Imagine a starving dog finding a bone stripped of all flesh, its saliva dripping as it gnaws on the bone in vain. Though it finds no satisfaction, the lingering scent of the bone prevents the dog from letting go. It continues gnawing, moving the bone from place to place, hoping for fulfillment. Yet it may die of exhaustion without ever finding nourishment. Similarly, all beings, both men and women, cling to sensual pleasures like a dog to a dry bone. Wealth, land, possessions, family, they're all like that bone. Though people enjoy these objects of desire with intense craving for long periods, they are never truly satisfied. They live with a constant yearning for fulfillment and happiness, consumed by their attachment. Beings are unable to let go of sensual pleasures and fail to consider renouncing the world to free themselves from the shackles of craving. They cling tightly to these pleasures, only to eventually die amidst the burdens of familial responsibilities. Indeed, the 5 sensual pleasures are like a dry bone. They bring much suffering and pain. The desire for sensual pleasures is utterly unreliable and riddled with faults and flaws. 3. Masapespamkama, the simile of the piece of meat. Sensual pleasures are akin to a piece of meat. For example, when a hawk snatches a piece of meat, other hawks immediately pursue it, surrounding and attacking it fiercely. As long as the hawk clings to the meat, it suffers continuous assaults. The moment it lets go of the meat, it is free from torment. In turn, another bird takes the meat and is similarly attacked. This pattern repeats endlessly. Likewise, those who cling to sensual pleasures, declaring them as mine or myself, expose themselves to constant danger, robbery, theft, jealousy, and harm from envious rivals. If they dedicate all their energy to guarding these pleasures, they may even lose their lives in unfavorable circumstances. Only by letting go of these attachments can one find peace. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures resemble a piece of meat. They bring far more pain than joy. Truly, the craving for sensual pleasures is deeply flawed and untrustworthy. 4. Tyakapamkama, the simile of the burning torch. Sensual pleasures are like a burning torch made of straw. When lit and carried against the wind, the torch burns upward, scorching the bearer's limbs, hands, arms, and legs. Unless the torch is discarded, it continues to cause pain and may even result in death. Similarly, sensual pleasures, when clung to with the hands of craving as mine or myself, burn the hearts of those who delight in their possessions. The flames of worry and anxiety over safeguarding these possessions grow ever larger. Despite one's careful efforts to protect them, the nature of these possessions ensures that they will eventually be lost or rendered meaningless. These possessions often turn into towering flames of suffering, leaving individuals engulfed in sorrow and despair. In extreme cases, they escalate into the flames of death. Thus, sensual pleasures, whether they be family, land, or wealth, are like a burning torch. They bring great pain and sorrow. Truly, the desire for sensual pleasures is deeply flawed and unreliable. 5. Agrakaspamkama, the simile of the pit of burning coals. Sensual pleasures are akin to a pit of burning coals, covered with ashes. They appear harmless. No smoke, no visible flames. But anyone who steps into the pit unaware of the hidden fire suffers severe burns, even worse than from an open flame. Likewise, sensual pleasures may seem delightful and harmless on the surface, but those who indulge in them are scorched by hidden flames of suffering. These hidden fires burn more intensely than visible flames. Beings caught in the pit of sensual desires endure immense pain, both from the effort of obtaining and protecting these pleasures and from the inevitable struggles of sustaining their livelihood and family life. The realm of sensual desires is like a vast pit of hidden flames. The greater the craving for pleasures, the larger and hotter the pit becomes. Sentient beings resemble pieces of wood or roots buried in this fiery pit. Indeed, the 5 sensual pleasures are like a pit of burning coals. They bring immense suffering and anguish. The craving for such pleasures is deeply flawed and utterly unreliable. 6. Sapinnakapamakama, the simile of a dream. The 5 sensual pleasures are like a dream. Imagine someone asleep, dreaming of being wealthy, a governor, or even an emperor, enjoying every sensual delight they desire and living a life of splendor. In the dream, everything feels real, and this luxurious life seems unending. However, when the person abruptly wakes, they realize everything was fleeting, intangible, and utterly meaningless. Similarly, beings in the realm of sensual desires, both humans and deva, are immersed in worldly and heavenly pleasures driven by craving, delusion, and arrogance, believing their lives of pleasure are real, permanent, and everlasting, but they are merely deluded. During their short lifespan, while enjoying these dreamlike, sensual pleasures, they must eventually pass on to another existence, leaving behind everything they cling to so fiercely, like the objects in a dream that disappear without a trace upon waking. All possessions that one clings to as me, mine, or my property during their brief life ultimately become irrelevant. Thus, sensual pleasures are like dreams. They bring immense pain and suffering. Indeed, the craving for sensual pleasures is utterly unreliable, filled with faults and flaws. 7. Yasitakupamakama, the simile of borrowed goods. The 5 sensual pleasures are like borrowed items. Consider someone who doesn't own fine jewelry but rents precious gems, gold, or silver to wear for a festival. They wear these borrowed items as if they were their own, feeling immense joy. However, when the time comes to return them, or when the rightful owner reclaims them, the person feels sadness and disappointment. Similarly, when the results of past good deeds allow someone to enjoy sensual pleasures, they might foolishly think such pleasures will last forever. But when these pleasures are lost, either through the consequences of past misdeeds or at the time of death, they reveal their impermanence. In life, people often think they own their possessions, but ultimately, they must leave everything behind with empty hands. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures are like borrowed goods. They bring great suffering and distress. Truly, the craving for sensual pleasures is deeply flawed and unreliable. 8. Rukkaphalupamakama, the simile of the fruit-laden tree. The 5 sensual pleasures are like a fruit-laden tree. Imagine a tree in a forest near a village, heavy with delicious fruits, none of which have fallen to the ground. A man wandering through the forest sees the tree and thinks, "This tree is full of sweet, ripe fruits, and none have fallen. I am skilled at climbing trees, so I will climb this one, eat to my heart's content, and fill my pockets with fruits." Thinking thus, he climbs the tree, eats some fruits, and fills his pockets. Meanwhile, another man enters the forest carrying an axe. Seeing the same tree, he thinks, "This tree is full of sweet fruits, none of which are on the ground, and I can't climb trees, so I'll chop it down and enjoy the fruits." The second man chops at the tree, and the first man, still atop it, is unable to descend quickly enough. He risks either death or severe injury. Similarly, a wealthy person enjoying sensual pleasures may be attacked, robbed, or harmed by another. This could lead to injury, disability, or even death, all because of their attachment to sensual pleasures. If the person dies clinging to these pleasures, they may be reborn into realms of suffering due to the intensity of their attachment. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures are like a fruit-laden tree. They bring immense pain and suffering. Alternatively, the 5 sensual pleasures can be compared to a poisonous fruit. A fruit may appear as fresh and appealing as the ripest mango, yet consuming it brings unbearable pain, even death. Similarly, people are lured by the appearance, fragrance, and taste of such fruits, only to suffer as their bodies are ravaged by poison. Likewise, those who lack the wisdom to see the true nature of sensual pleasures mistake their alluring exterior for genuine joy. Drawn by this deceptive allure, they drown in the toxins of craving, hatred, and delusion, ultimately succumbing to death and despair. With these toxins still clinging to their minds, they are reborn into realms of suffering, not realms of happiness. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures are like poisonous fruit. They bring immense pain and suffering. Truly, the craving for sensual pleasures is utterly unreliable, filled with flaws and dangers. 9. Asaisanupamakama, the simile of the butcher's block. The 5 sensual pleasures are like a butcher's block. On such a block, animals are slaughtered, their flesh cut and divided. It is a place where sentient beings meet their end. Similarly, the 5 sensual pleasures destroy those who indulge in them through the knives and axes of their own craving. Those who place themselves on the butcher's block of sensual pleasures, driven by desire, cannot develop the detachment needed to walk the broad path of meditation, which leads to breaking the knives of craving and shattering the axes of attachment. These individuals meet their demise in tragic circumstances. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures are like a butcher's block. They bring immense pain and suffering. 10. Sadasalupamakama, the simile of the sharp sword or spear. The 5 sensual pleasures are like the sharp blade of a sword or spear. Such weapons cut or pierce anything they touch, designed solely to kill and destroy. Similarly, the 5 sensual pleasures are sharp and deadly. They cut deeply into and pierce anyone who becomes attached to them. For example, a person caught by the hook of sensual craving, like a fish caught on a hook, cannot easily free themselves and suffers greatly as a result, pierced by the sword or spear of sensual craving. Such individuals forget the virtues of morality, sila, concentration, samadhi, and wisdom, panna, that they may have previously cultivated. Ultimately, they fall into ruin. The 5 sensual pleasures are like sharp swords or spears, lethal weapons that kill and destroy. Those who have not abandoned craving for these pleasures are like prisoners, perpetually surrounded by the blades of the 5 sensual pleasures. Regardless of the life they are born into, these blades cling to anyone who touches them, sparing no one. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures are like sharp swords or spears. They bring immense pain and suffering. Truly, the craving for sensual pleasures is deeply flawed, unreliable, and full of faults. The prince's renunciation. Upon awakening, the prince sat cross-legged on his luxurious bed and looked around. He saw the court dancers asleep. Some sprawled over their musical instruments, with saliva dripping from their mouths, staining their cheeks and bodies. Others grinding their teeth, snoring loudly, or muttering incoherently in their sleep. Some lay with their mouths wide open, while others were disheveled, naked, or entangled in their own hair. The once grand chamber appeared like a dreadful cemetery filled with ghastly corpses. Witnessing these revolting transformations, the prince's revulsion for sensual pleasures deepened. He thought, "Cursed are these sensual pleasures, bringing nothing but pain and suffering. They are like the head of a venomous snake." Sapasarupamakama, the simile of the snake's head. The 5 sensual pleasures are like the head of a venomous snake, deadly, terrifying, and repulsive. Just as the head of a venomous snake causes immeasurable harm to anyone who touches it, the 5 sensual pleasures are equally detestable and dangerous. They are filled with the potent venom of defilements that poison the minds of those who come into contact with them or are bitten by them. Like the snake's head, sensual pleasures bring no benefit to the world. Instead, they cause endless harm and suffering to everyone entangled in them. Anyone who touches or steps upon the snake's head faces grave danger. Thus, the 5 sensual pleasures are like the head of a venomous snake. They bring immense pain and anguish. Indeed, the craving for sensual pleasures is utterly unreliable, riddled with faults and flaws. Reflecting on the palace, the prince thought, This magnificent palace, comparable to the heavenly palace of Vejayanta, now resembles a burial ground. The three realms, the sensual realm, the form realm, and the formless realm, are like a great house engulfed in flames. All beings, humans, devas, and brahmas, must endure birth, aging, sickness, and death. After death, they are reborn, only to age, fall ill, and die again. Throughout countless cycles of existence, beings endure unimaginable suffering, yet they remain ignorant of the path that leads beyond birth, aging, sickness, and death. When will they discover this path? Recognizing the terror of birth, aging, sickness, and death, and seeing that sensual pleasures and the three realms bring only fleeting happiness while causing immense suffering and sin, the prince resolved to renounce all attachment to the five sensual pleasures. He uttered his thoughts. Upadutta Vedabo. Oh, how tormenting and miserable this is. Upasatha Vedabo. Oh, how oppressive and crushing this is. The prince's determination to renounce the world intensified, and he thought, today is the day I leave the household life and become a Sama, preparation for the great renunciation. The prince rose from his bed and went to the main gate, where he asked, "Who is there?" Channa, his loyal charioteer and companion since birth, replied, "It is I, Channa." The prince instructed, "Tonight, I will renounce the world. Tell no one. Go and prepare the swift Sindhi steed." Channa, understanding the gravity of the command, replied, "Yes, my lord," and took the necessary equipment to the stables. In the dim light of fragrant oil lamps, Channa approached Kaka, the magnificent Sindhi steed that had never been defeated. The horse stood beneath a canopy adorned with garlands of jasmine flowers. Channa thought, "I will prepare this auspicious horse Kaka to carry the prince to his renunciation tonight." As Channa saddled the horse, Kaka sensed something unusual. The horse thought, "This time, the saddle is secured tightly. It was never this firm when we went to the royal garden. Tonight, the prince is surely riding me for his great renunciation." Overcome with joy, Kaka neighed loudly. Normally, this sound would have reverberated across the city of Kapilavatthu, but the Devas ensured that no one heard it, visiting his son before departure. While Channa prepared the horse, the prince thought, "I will visit my newborn son before I leave for the renunciation." The prince went to Queen Yasodhara's chamber and opened the door. The room glowed softly under the light of fragrant oil lamps. Queen Yasodhara lay sleeping on a bed adorned with jasmine flowers, with baby Rahula's head resting on her arm. Standing at the threshold, the prince gazed at his son and thought, "If I move Yasodhara's arm to hold my son, she will wake, and this will hinder my renunciation. I cannot meet my son now. After I attain Buddhahood, I will return to see him." With this thought, the prince left the chamber and descended to where Kaka awaited. He spoke to the horse. "My loyal friend, Kaka, tonight you must help me. When I achieve Buddhahood, I will save all sentient beings, including Devas, from the cycle of birth and death and lead them to the supreme land of Nirvāṇa, the great departure." The prince mounted Kaka, the majestic steed, measuring 18 spans from neck to tail, possessed immense strength and unparalleled speed. Its snow-white body gleamed like a freshly polished conch shell, exuding grace and charm. On the horse, Channa held tightly to its tail, accompanying the prince. In the stillness of the night, on the full moon day of Shah in the year 97 of the Maha era, the Bodhisattva left the palace. As the horse approached the city's main gate, the Devas placed their hands beneath its hooves, ensuring that no sound disturbed the sleeping city. Thus began the prince's journey toward enlightenment. The prince, Channa, and the horse Kaka, each with their own resolve. At the same time, King Siddhattha had fortified the main gates of Kapilavatthu to prevent the prince from leaving. Each gate was reinforced so that it required the combined strength of 1,000 soldiers to open. The king thought, "With such measures in place, my son will not be able to leave the city unnoticed." The prince, however, possessed extraordinary strength, equivalent to that of 10,000 men. Reflecting on this, he thought, "If the city gates do not open, I will escape today using my own strength. While seated on the back of the mighty Kaka, I will hold Channa, who is gripping the horse's tail, and leap over the city wall, which stands 18 cubits high." Channa, too, resolved, "If the city gates do not open, I will place the prince on my shoulders, hold the horse Kaka under my right arm, and leap over the city wall with them both." Even Kaka, the royal steed, thought to himself, "If the city gates do not open, I will ensure the prince remains seated on my back, with Channa holding onto my tail, and leap over the 18-cubit-high wall of Kapilavatthu to carry them both to safety." Mara's attempt to obstruct the prince. While the three shared this unyielding determination, the celestial beings guarding the gates, moved by the prince's boundless merit, joyfully opened the gates for him to leave. As the prince rode out of the city, accompanied by Channa, Mara Vasavati, the tempter and adversary of liberation, descended from the paranimita Vasavati heaven to the human realm. Mara appeared before the prince, his presence instantaneous, like the extension or retraction of an arm. Hovering in midair, Mara spoke, "Manikama Mahavira Ito Te Satam Dine, Dibba Tu Kakaratana Ada Pada Bhavasati." O mighty and valiant prince, do not renounce the world and become a Sama just yet. On the 7th day from now, the celestial wheel of fortune will appear for you. Mara tried to dissuade the prince further, saying, "You are destined to become a Kakavati, wheel-turning monarch, ruling over the 4 great continents and their 2,000 surrounding islands. Return to your palace." "Your Highness," the Bodhisattva calmly asked, "Who are you, trying to discourage me from my purpose?" Mara replied, "I am Mara Vasavati." Undeterred, the Bodhisattva responded resolutely, "Janmaha Maharaja, Meha Kakasa Sambhava, Anadhikoham Regina, Gaka Tva Mara Maida." O powerful Mara, I already know that the celestial wheel will indeed arise for me, but I have no desire to be a ruler of the 4 continents. Leave now, Mara, and stand aside. Sakala Dasa Sahasapai, Lokad Hedamaha Pana, Unnadetva Bhavisami, Buddho Lok Vinayako. I will strive to become a Buddha, a guide to the world. I will shake the 10,000-fold world system and bring all sentient beings to the victorious land of Nirvāṇa. Mara, defeated, issued a final threat. "Prince Siddhattha, remember my words. From this moment onward, I will ensure you know who I am. I will follow you as your shadow, ready to exploit any arising defilements in your mind." Indeed, Mara shadowed the Bodhisattva for 7 years, intent on obstructing him at every opportunity. The procession of Devas and Brahmas to the Anoma River. At the age of 29, standing on the brink of worldly glory as a Kakavati, the prince cast aside this honor as if discarding spittle. At midnight on the full moon day of Shah in the year 97 of the Maha era, he departed from his magnificent palace, akin to the palace of a wheel-turning monarch. As he rode into the night, a fleeting desire to look back at Kapilavatthu arose in his mind. At that moment, the earth itself seemed to speak. "O noble Bodhisattva, your merit ensures that you do not need to turn back to see what you desire. The city will appear before you wherever you stand." Indeed, the prince beheld Kapilavatthu as if it lay before him, without turning back. The spot where Kaka paused was later marked by a stupa named Kaka Nivatana. Continuing his journey on Kaka's majestic back, the prince passed through the 3 kingdoms of the Sakyas, Kaliyas, and Malas, covering a distance of 30 yojanas in a single night. The divine procession and Kaka's noble effort. Kaka, swift as the wind, could circle Mount Kakavala in the morning and return by midday. However, on this occasion, his pace was slowed by the thick layer of celestial flowers strewn by Devas and Brahmas, Nagas, serpents, and Garuas, mythical birds. These floral offerings formed a bed of blossoms that reached the horse's knees, as though he were traversing a muddy swamp. Despite this, Kaka pressed on, and by dawn, they reached the banks of the Anoma River, marking the completion of the prince's majestic departure from the palace. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts. And most importantly, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next video.